The little girl told the millionaire, "Daddy, I want her as my sister," while pointing at the homeless woman. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Let's begin. On Christmas Eve, Manchester was adorned with lights and enchantment. The high street pedestrian area, with its decorated trees and Christmas performances, attracted entire families in search of magic and tradition. Among them, Caleb Anderson walked with his young daughter, Olivia, trying to keep alive the Christmas spirit that meant so much to the girl since the passing of her mother, Camilla. A widower for 2 years, Caleb was the kind of man who learned to live one day at a time. Leader of one of the largest construction companies in the north of the country, he lived his life methodically, almost robotically, following routines that concealed a grief still alive and silent. Olivia, on the other hand, was pure life. At just 4 years old, she carried a sparkle in her eyes that resembled her mother's, and in her heart, an innocent desire to fix the world. The cold Manchester air that night was softened by the warmth of the people who crowded the city centre. As father and daughter admired the city's main Christmas tree, a light drizzle began to fall, gradually dispersing the visitors. Caleb suggested they return home, but something caught Olivia's attention. She tugged on her father's arm and ran towards Regent's Park, where a small bandstand sheltered a solitary figure. "Daddy, look!" Olivia pointed with her gloved little finger. "That lady has a baby!" Sitting on a wooden bench, a young woman, huddled, held a trembling baby in her arms, barely covered by a thin blanket. Olivia's big eyes filled with compassion. The girl stood motionless for a moment, observing the scene until she turned to her father and uttered the phrase that would shape the course of everything from then on. "Daddy, I want her as my sister." Caleb's reaction was automatic. He asked his daughter to step back, claiming they shouldn't disturb, but it was impossible to ignore the intensity of that request. There was an urgency in Olivia's voice that didn't come from want, but from a kind of love that only children know. "Olivia, darling, we can't just—" But the girl had already approached the young woman, who now looked startled at the child who had planted herself in front of her. "Hi, I'm Olivia. Are you cold? My daddy has a big house, you know." The businessman approached cautiously, embarrassed by his daughter's direct approach. The young woman hesitated, trying to stand up, apologizing for being there, but it was clear she had nowhere to go. "I apologize for my daughter. She's quite direct." Caleb observed the trembling baby. "Do you need help?" The young woman, with deep brown eyes and curly hair tied in a messy bun, appeared to be barely 20 years old. Her answer came between teeth chattering from the cold. "We're fine, thank you. Just waiting for the rain to pass." "The rain won't pass anytime soon," Caleb explained, knowing the city's climate well. "And that baby seems very cold. We can offer you a place to spend the night, just until you can find something better." She refused at first, then accepted. She said her name was Raina, and the baby, only a few weeks old, was named David. "It's just for tonight," she stated, more to herself than to Caleb. The ride home was silent, interrupted only by Olivia's animated comments, who was already planning where David would sleep and which toys she would share with her new brother. In the taxi, Raina held the baby close to her chest, as if fearing he might disappear. Her eyes scanned the illuminated avenues of Manchester, registering the route with the attention of someone who had once had to memorize escape routes. In the penthouse apartment in the Chelsea neighborhood, Raina was met with the usual distrust of Mrs. Nelly, the housekeeper for years. The 60-year-old woman, with roots in the north of the country and a sharp tongue that spared no one, not even her boss, raised her eyebrows at the sight of the unknown young woman. "Good evening, Mrs. Nelly. This is Raina." "And baby David. They'll be spending the night with us," Caleb explained, as he helped Olivia take off her coat. Was all the housekeeper replied, before heading to the kitchen, grumbling something about having to make more food now. "Don't worry about her," Caleb smiled, embarrassed. "Mrs. Nelly has a heart bigger than her tongue. She just doesn't like to admit it." Raina merely nodded, still uncomfortable with the situation. Her eyes scanned the luxurious environment, the leather sofas, the artwork on the walls, the marble details. It was a world completely different from her own. I'll show you. Where you'll sleep, Caleb offered. We have a guest room that we rarely use. The baby can sleep in my room, Olivia exclaimed, jumping with excitement. I have a doll's crib that's really big. Olivia, Caleb intervened with a patient tone. David is a real baby, not a doll. He needs to stay with his mother. The guest room was spacious, with a king-size bed and minimalist decor in shades of beige and blue. There was a comfortable armchair by the window from where one could see the city lights. The bathroom is there, Caleb pointed to a door. There. Should be clean towels in the cabinet. If you need anything during the night, just call. My room is at the end of the hall. Raina thanked him in a low voice, still processing the turn her life had taken in the last few hours. When Caleb closed the door, leaving her alone with David, she finally allowed the tears to fall silently. The baby, now warmer, slept peacefully in her arms. It's going to be okay, my love, she whispered to her son. Tomorrow we'll find a place just for us. But tomorrow had other plans. During the early hours of the morning, David began to cry differently, a high-pitched cry that Raina had never heard before. The baby was hot, very hot. Worried, she left the room in search of help and found Caleb in the hallway, already alerted by the crying. He has a fever, she explained, her voice trembling. A very high fever. Caleb didn't hesitate. I'll get the car. We're going to the hospital. In minutes, they were in the pediatric emergency room of St. Jude's Children's Hospital, Manchester's largest children's hospital. The urgency of the situation seemed to have erased any embarrassment or social barriers. There they were, just two people desperate to help a sick baby. The diagnosis was quick: bronchiolitis, common in newborns, but potentially dangerous. David would need to be hospitalized to receive oxygen and intravenous medication. How long? Raina asked the doctor, mentally calculating how much such treatment would cost. She had no health insurance, no money, nothing but the clothes on her back. A few days, maybe a week, the doctor replied. He's responding well, but we need to monitor him. When they were alone in the waiting room, Raina collapsed into a chair, the weight of the world on her fragile shoulders. I have no way to pay for this, she admitted, ashamed. I should have noticed earlier that he was sick. Don't worry about that now, Caleb interrupted her, sitting beside her. The important thing is that David receives the treatment he needs. We'll sort out the rest later. For the first time, Raina looked directly into Caleb's eyes. There was no pity there, as she feared, only genuine understanding. Something inside her broke, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't completely alone. The days at the hospital created a strange routine. Caleb alternated between work at the construction company, caring for Olivia, and visiting the hospital. Raina practically didn't leave David's side, sleeping in the uncomfortable armchair in the room. Occasionally, Mrs. Nellie would appear with homemade meals, complaining that a hospital is no place to eat properly, and that a skinny girl like that can't go without eating. Olivia, who couldn't visit the pediatric ward due to age restrictions, was anxious for news of her little brother. Every day she prepared a new drawing for David, which Caleb faithfully delivered to Raina. On the third night of hospitalization, Caleb arrived at the hospital later than usual. He found Raina asleep in the armchair, her head hanging at an uncomfortable angle. David slept peacefully in the hospital crib, his vital signs stable on the monitor. Caleb observed the scene for a moment, feeling an emotion he couldn't name. He approached silently and placed his jacket over Raina. The movement woke her. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you, he whispered. It's okay, she replied, adjusting herself. What time is it? Almost midnight. The meeting took longer than expected. Raina nodded, noticing the jacket. Thank you. Comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the constant beep of David's heart monitor. How's the fever? Caleb asked, approaching the crib to observe the baby. It finally broke. The doctor said if he continues like this, we might be discharged in 2 days. The news was good, but it brought with it an inevitable question. What would happen next? You know, Caleb began hesitantly, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go out there with David still recovering. Manchester winters are harsh. Raina ran her hand through her disheveled hair, a gesture Caleb had noticed was common when she was nervous. I've taken up too much of your time and money. I can't abuse your kindness anymore. It's not kindness, Raina. It's the right thing to do. He paused. Besides, Olivia would never forgive me if I let her little brother leave like that. A reluctant smile appeared on Raina's lips. She's special, your daughter. She reminds me a lot of my sister when she was little. It was the first time she had mentioned anything about her family, and Caleb took the opening. Do you have siblings? Raina nodded, her gaze distant. A younger sister, Tiana. She lives with my mother in Brighton. She hesitated. We haven't spoken in almost a year. Because of David? The question hung in the air for a few seconds. Because of a lot of things, she finally replied. My father is a pastor, very strict. When he found out about the pregnancy, he gave me two options, either solve the problem or leave home. I chose to leave. Caleb felt a pang in his chest, imagining a young pregnant woman alone, expelled by her own family. And David's father? Luke. The name came out as a tired sigh. An engineering student, son of a colleague of my father's. When he found out about the pregnancy, he said it wasn't his, that I was trying to pull a scam. Typical. The bitterness in her voice contrasted with the gentleness with which she caressed David's tiny hand. We were living with a friend in London, but the apartment was small and her boyfriend didn't want me there, she continued, as if a dam had broken. I came to Manchester because an acquaintance said there was work here, but when I arrived she had moved, the money ran out quickly. And you ended up in the park on Christmas Eve, Caleb completed. Yes. She smiled without joy. I guess the universe has a strange sense of humor. Or maybe, Caleb suggested, it knew exactly what it was doing when it put Olivia in your path. The next morning, when the doctor made his rounds, he found something unusual. In addition to the young mother, there was a businessman in a suit and a 4-year-old girl who had managed to bypass hospital security, carrying a huge balloon with the words, "Get well soon, little brother." Sorry, doctor, Caleb tried to explain while Olivia was already climbing onto the armchair to get a better look at the baby. My daughter is a bit persistent. The doctor smiled. Family is the best medicine, Mr. Anderson, and it seems little David has a very dedicated family. Raina and Caleb exchanged glances, but neither corrected the doctor. That afternoon, David was discharged. The return to Caleb's apartment had a different air now. It was no longer a temporary arrangement for one night, but something undefined, fluid. Mrs. Nellie had prepared the room with more care. There was a makeshift crib, actually an old piece of Olivia's, furniture that had been stored away, sterilized baby bottles and a pile of new diapers. I didn't know the right size, so I bought various ones, the housekeeper explained, with a posture that tried to disguise her affection. And there's soup ready because a mother of a newborn doesn't even have time to breathe, let alone cook. Thank you, Mrs. Nellie, Raina thanked, genuinely touched. No need to thank me, girl. Just take good care of that baby. And before anyone could notice her emotion, the old lady returned to the kitchen, complaining about something no one quite understood. That night, after Olivia finally fell asleep after insisting on 3 stories, Caleb found Raina on the penthouse balcony. She was watching the city lights, David sleeping peacefully in her arms. He looks better, Caleb commented, offering her a cup of tea, which she accepted. Yes, the fever hasn't returned. The doctor said he'll be fully recovered in a week. Caleb leaned on the balcony railing, breathing in the Manchester night air. I've been thinking, he began, choosing his words carefully. Why don't you stay until after New Year's? It would give David time to fully recover, and you could calmly organize your next steps. Raina was silent for a few moments, her gaze lost in the urban landscape. I don't want to be a charity case, Caleb. It's not charity, he replied firmly. It's solidarity. Something we all need at some point in life. The answer seemed to satisfy her for now, or perhaps she was just too tired to argue. They remained there, side by side, sharing a silence that, somehow, said more than words. Meanwhile, in Olivia's room, the girl had woken up and was looking out the window watching her father and Raina on the balcony. With the peculiar wisdom of children, she smiled as if she had discovered a great secret. "Heavenly Daddy," she whispered, as her mother taught her to do when she really wanted something. "Thank you for bringing my sister and my little brother. Now all Daddy needs to do is smile again." And as if the universe conspired in her favor, at that exact moment, Caleb let out a genuine laugh in response to something Raina said. The sound echoed through the penthouse, filling spaces that had long been empty. Olivia returned to her bed, satisfied, unaware that this was just the beginning of a much larger story that was about to unfold. The following days brought a routine that, though improvised, began to take on the contours of normality. David recovered well, gaining weight and becoming more alert. Raina divided her time between caring for the baby and small chores around the house, insisting on helping as a way of returning the hospitality. Olivia was radiant with the presence of her new siblings, and even Mrs. Nellie seemed less grumpy. Caleb, in turn, rediscovered sensations he had stored away in a distant part of his memory. The sound of a baby, crying in the middle of the night, the whispered conversations so as not to wake the children, the organized chaos that dominated the living room with toys and diapers scattered, all of this had a strangely comforting effect, as if life was finally beginning to pulse again in that apartment which for so long had served only as a silent refuge for his grief. One Saturday afternoon, while Olivia drew with colored pencils scattered across the living room floor, Raina commented, almost casually, that she had studied visual arts before getting pregnant. "I was passionate about drawing and painting," she explained, admiring Olivia's loose strokes on the paper. "I even completed 3 years of fine arts college in London." Caleb, who was working on his laptop near the dining table, looked up with interest. "Really? What a coincidence!" There was something in his tone of voice that made Raina look at him curiously. "Why?" He slowly closed the laptop, as if pondering something important. "Camilla, my wife. She was also an artist, a painter actually, quite recognized in the contemporary art scene here." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife so directly since Raina arrived. The young woman perceived the weight of those words, the meaning behind the trust. "I'm so sorry," she said genuinely. "It must be difficult for you and for Olivia." Caleb nodded, his gaze sweeping the room until it rested on his daughter, who was humming as she colored. "Would you like to see some of her works?" The question came laden with meaning. It was more than an invitation to appreciate art. It was a door opening to a part of his life that remained closed to almost everyone. "I'd love to," Raina replied, sensing the importance of the moment. Caleb stood up and gestured for her to follow him. They stopped in front of a door at the end of the corridor, one Raina had never seen open. "This was her studio," he explained, turning the doorknob. "I kept everything as it was. Maybe because I didn't know what to do, maybe because I wasn't ready to change." The scent of oil paint, turpentine, and fabric hit Raina as soon as the door opened. Light streamed in through a large north-facing window, illuminating a spacious area with canvases of various sizes distributed throughout the room. Some were covered with cloths, others displayed in all their colorful glory. There were paint stains on the wooden floor, brushes organized in ceramic pots, and sketches tacked to a large corkboard. Raina entered silently, like one entering a temple. Her eyes scanned the works with genuine admiration. "She was incredible," she whispered, approaching a large canvas that dominated one of the walls. The painting depicted a woman from behind, facing a fiery horizon with a small child by the hand. The vibrant colors contrasted with the figure's almost resigned posture. "This was the last work she completed," Caleb explained, standing beside Raina. "It's called Tomorrow." "It's powerful," Raina commented, her fingers hovering inches from the canvas, not touching. "The brushstrokes have so much energy, but there's a deep melancholy in the composition, as if she was—" She hesitated. "Saying goodbye?" Caleb completed with a sad smile. "Yes, sometimes I think the same. The doctors said she couldn't have known, that the diagnosis came later, but Camilla always had an almost supernatural sensitivity. They walked through the studio together, with Caleb sharing small stories about each work, and Raina recognizing techniques and influences with a trained eye. The connection between them deepened, in that sacred space, not only through artistic affinity, but through the exchange of experiences that carried invisible marks, losses, and overcoming that didn't need to be said aloud. On one of the shelves, Raina noticed a series of books on art therapy and social art projects. Camilla believed in the transformative power of art, Caleb explained, following the young woman's gaze. She founded the Camilla Anderson Foundation, which promotes artistic projects in low-income communities here in Manchester. It was her life's project. And the foundation still exists? Yes, we maintain the activities, Caleb replied, although it's difficult without her. Vision to guide. I've done my best, but I don't have the artistic eye needed to evaluate certain projects. Raina nodded, understanding. Her fingers delicately traced the spines of the books. She had good taste, she commented, recognizing authors and methodologies. Some of these books were references in my art education classes. Really? Caleb seemed genuinely interested. Do you have experience teaching art? A little. I did an internship in a social project in a London suburb during college. We worked with children and teenagers, using art as a tool for expression and development. Something lit up in Caleb's eyes, an idea perhaps, or a possibility that was beginning to take shape. It would be interesting to visit the foundation one of these days, he suggested, in a casual tone. If you're interested, of course. I'd love to, Raina replied sincerely. When they left the studio, something had changed between them. A mutual understanding, a deeper respect, a common ground discovered amidst their differences. Back in the living room, they found Olivia still absorbed in her drawings. The girl held up a colorful paper as soon as she saw them. Look, Auntie Ray, I drew our family. The drawing showed 5 stick figures, a large one labeled Daddy, a small one as me, a medium one as Auntie Ray, a tiny one as Baby David, and a smiling figure with wings floating above everyone, identified as Mommy in Heaven. Raina felt a lump in her throat, realizing how she had been incorporated into the girl's vision of family. She quickly looked at Caleb, fearing his reaction to seeing his wife represented as an angel, but he was smiling, his eyes sparkling with contained emotion. It's beautiful, my love, he said, bending down to hug his daughter. Mommy would have loved it. That night, after putting Olivia to bed, Raina spent more time than usual observing David in his peaceful sleep. The baby no longer seemed as fragile as in the first few days. His cheeks were fuller, and there was a contentment on his face that reflected the secure environment in which he now lived. We're pushing our luck, you know, she whispered to her sleeping son. This place isn't ours. These people aren't our real family, no matter how much it seems. Soon we'll have to go our own way. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The truth was that in just 2 weeks, that apartment already felt more like a home than any other place she had been in recent years. The next day, Sunday, Caleb suggested a trip to the botanical garden. It was a sunny day, rare for a Manchester winter, and he thought the fresh air would do everyone good. The idea of going out in public, as a family, made Raina apprehensive, but Olivia's excitement was impossible to resist. The outing was surprisingly peaceful. They walked through the geometric gardens, took photos in front of the glass conservatory, and even had an impromptu picnic with sandwiches prepared by Mrs. Nellie. David slept most of the time, comfortably nestled in a sling Caleb had bought especially for the occasion. It was upon returning home that the first complication arose. Frederick Mason, one of the building's neighbors and Caleb's colleague from the Rotary Club, approached them in the elevator with a forced smile. Anderson, long time no see. I didn't know you'd expanded your family. There was something in the man's tone of voice that instantly put Raina on alert. We're hosting friends for a while, Caleb replied naturally, although Raina could sense the tension in his shoulders. Of course, the man smiled, looking brazenly at David and then at Raina. Very humanitarian of you. When they reached their floor, Caleb seemed disturbed. As soon as they entered the apartment, he apologized. "Don't mind Frederick, he's always been a busybody." "It's okay," Raina replied, though they both knew it wasn't. The next morning, Caleb found his name in an online social column news story. CEO of Anderson Construction shelters homeless woman with baby in his penthouse. The article, full of innuendo and half-truths, even included a photo taken from a distance at the botanical garden, where Caleb appeared carrying David. "Idiots," he muttered, slamming his laptop shut. But the damage was done. Throughout the day, Caleb received several messages of concern from partners and friends. The tone ranged from thinly veiled curiosity to unsolicited advice about checking the young woman's past thoroughly and being careful with scammers. Raina noticed the change in his mood, and after putting David to sleep, confronted him directly. "What happened? You've been acting strange since this morning." Caleb hesitated, then decided to be honest. He showed her the news article and the messages he had received. Raina read everything in silence, her face a mask of wounded dignity. "I knew this would happen," she said finally. "That's why we should leave as soon as possible." "No," Caleb replied firmly. "I'm not going to let a bunch of gossips decide who I can or cannot help. But this could affect your business, your reputation." "To hell with reputation," he responded, surprising her with his intensity. "Do you think I care what they think? If I cared that much, I wouldn't have followed Olivia that Christmas night. I wouldn't have offered our home. I wouldn't have—" He stopped, taking a deep breath to calm himself. "What I mean is, I'm not going to kick you and David out because of gossip." Raina watched him, torn between gratitude and concern. "But what are you going to do?" "I'm going to face it head on," he replied, determined. "First thing tomorrow." The next morning, Caleb called an impromptu press conference at the headquarters of the Camilla Anderson Foundation. Journalists from various outlets attended, curious about the buzz on social media. With a serene demeanor, Caleb spoke about empathy, solidarity, and the values that had always guided both his personal life and the Anderson family's businesses. If sheltering a young mother and her vulnerable baby is considered scandalous, then perhaps our society needs to re-examine its values, he declared, his voice firm. The Camilla Anderson Foundation has always championed inclusion and human dignity. It would be hypocritical of me to preach these values publicly and deny them in my private life. Caleb's statements garnered national attention and divided opinions among allies and detractors. While some applauded him for his courage and consistency, others questioned his real intentions. As the media storm unfolded, Raina stayed out of the spotlight, protecting David from unwanted exposure. The situation, however, made her reflect on her position in that house and how much she was, involuntarily, altering the dynamic of Caleb's life. One particularly tense afternoon, after yet another sensationalist article, Raina found Caleb in his office visibly tired. "This will pass," he assured her, trying to sound optimistic. "Today's news is tomorrow's fish and chips wrapper, as my father used to say." "Caleb," she began, gathering her courage, "we need to talk about what happens next." "Next?" "Yes, next. David is already recovered. I've had time to think, and we can't continue indefinitely in this situation." Caleb watched her for a moment before responding. "Do you have a plan?" "I've been thinking about going back to London," she admitted. "I have some friends there who could help me find a job. Maybe pick up college again, who knows?" The idea of Raina leaving caused Caleb an inexplicable discomfort, but he struggled to maintain his composure. "And do you think that would be best for you and David now?" "I don't know what would be best," she replied honestly. "I just know I can't keep being a burden on your life." "You're not a burden, Raina. Never were." "Then what am I, Caleb? A charity project? The homeless girl you saved at Christmas to ease your conscience?" The words came out harsher than she intended, laden with insecurities and fears she had been suppressing. "Is that what you think?" Caleb asked, genuinely hurt. "That you're some kind of redemption project for me?" Raina looked away, regretting the outburst. "No, I'm sorry. It's just that this whole situation confuses me. I'm not used to depending on anyone, and now I depend on you for everything. Caleb approached, sitting beside her on the sofa. Look, I understand your concern, truly. But I want you to know there's no rush. You and David can stay for as long as necessary, until you feel ready to move forward. She nodded, grateful for his understanding, but still uneasy about the situation. And there's something else, Caleb continued. I've been thinking. The foundation needs someone with an arts background to help coordinate the educational projects. It would be a paid position, with flexible hours, compatible with caring for David. Raina stared at him, surprised by the proposal. Are you offering me a job, out of pity? No, out of competence, he replied firmly. You have training in the field, experience with social projects, and from what I saw in the studio, a genuine knowledge of art. The foundation needs someone like that. It would be a mutual benefit. The offer was tempting, but Raina hesitated, afraid of putting down roots that would later be painful to sever. Can I think about it? Of course, Caleb smiled. No pressure. In the days that followed, Caleb's proposal lingered in Raina's mind. The idea of having her own money, of contributing to a meaningful project, of using her training for something concrete, all of this was extremely appealing. But there was also the fear of involvement, of creating expectations, of getting used to a life that might not truly be hers. One afternoon, while David slept, she decided to visit the foundation to learn more about the work done there. She took a taxi and arrived at the historic mansion in the Clerkenwell neighborhood, where the institution's headquarters were located. She was greeted by Sandra, the current administrative coordinator, a friendly woman who had worked with Camilla for years. "So you're Raina," Sandra exclaimed with a genuine smile. "Caleb spoke very highly of you." "He mentioned that maybe I could help in some way," Raina replied cautiously. "Help? My dear, it would be a blessing to have someone with an arts background here. Since Camilla left us, we've managed as best we can, but we lack someone with a technical eye to evaluate projects and guide the workshop leaders." Sandra made a point of showing her all the facilities, the classrooms, the small auditorium, the gallery where students' works were exhibited, and even the library specialized in art education. This was Camilla's darling, Sandra explained, entering the cozy library. She believed that theoretical knowledge was as important as practice. She used to say that art without reflection is just decoration. Raina smiled, recognizing the depth of the thought. She seemed to be an incredible woman. She was, Sandra agreed, with a nostalgic look. You know, when Caleb first mentioned you, I confess I was apprehensive. I thought it was just, well, you know. Charity, Raina completed, already accustomed to suspicion. Exactly. But then he talked about your background, your interest in art education, and I thought, maybe this is exactly what the foundation needs. As they walked through the corridors, Raina was introduced to some students and teachers. Everyone received her with curiosity and respect. A group of children worked on a large collective canvas, creating a colorful mural under the guidance of a young teacher. This is the Community Colors Project, Sandra explained. We work with public school children, offering visual arts workshops after school hours. Raina observed the dynamics of the class, the interaction between the teacher and the students, the creative freedom within a clear pedagogical structure. It was exactly the kind of work she had always dreamed of developing. "How many students do you currently have?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Around 200, distributed across several projects. In addition to this, we have workshops in photography, ceramics, urban graffiti, and even an incubator for artistic projects for young entrepreneurs." "Impressive," Raina commented, increasingly absorbed by the atmosphere of the place. At the end of the visit, sitting in the foundation's inner garden, Raina tried to process everything she had seen and felt. The idea of working there, of contributing to such a significant project, grew stronger with each passing minute. "What do you think?" Sandra asked, sitting beside her. "It's incredible, truly inspiring." "So? Do you think you could join us, even temporarily?" Raina took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. "I really want to, truly. But I'm afraid to start something I can't finish. My situation is complicated. Sandra smiled, with the wisdom of someone who has seen a lot of life. My dear, all situations are complicated. Life is complicated. But sometimes we need to take a leap of faith, you know? Let go of fear and embrace opportunities when they appear. The old woman's words resonated deeply with Raina. Maybe it was time to stop running, to build something real for her and for David. I'll think about it carefully, she promised, getting up to say goodbye. On the way back to the apartment, Raina allowed herself to dream of the possibility of a true, fresh start. A job that valued her skills, a safe environment to raise David, people who welcomed them without judgment. But then she remembered the news, the curious glances, the malicious comments. What if her presence continued to harm Caleb? What if people never saw her beyond the homeless woman who scammed the businessman? Upon arriving at the apartment, she found Olivia and Mrs. Nellie making cookies in the kitchen. The girl ran to hug her as soon as she saw her. "Auntie Ray, we made chocolate chip cookies for you and David." "David doesn't eat cookies yet, young lady," Mrs. Nellie corrected in her blunt but affectionate way. "But Raina certainly deserves some after being out for so long. Where were you, girl?" "I went to visit the foundation," Raina replied, accepting the still warm cookie Olivia offered her. "Ah, Saint Camilla's work," the housekeeper commented, making the sign of the cross. "That's a blessed place." Raina smiled, silently agreeing. There was something truly special about the foundation, a positive energy that transcended the walls of the mansion. That night, after dinner, when everyone had retired, Raina found Caleb on the balcony, contemplating the city as he often did when he needed to think. "I visited the foundation today," she said, joining him in the nightly contemplation. "I know, Sandra called me, all excited. It's incredible work you do there." "Camilla did," he corrected gently. "I just try to keep it alive." They stood in silence for a few moments, the cold Manchester air carrying the distant scent of pine trees. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Raina finally said, "about working at the foundation. And I'd like to accept, if the invitation is still open." Caleb's smile lit up his face in a way Raina had rarely seen. "The invitation is more open than ever," he replied, extending his hand as if to seal an agreement. Raina shook his hand, feeling something calm within her. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem just a series of frightening uncertainties. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything." "No need to thank me," he replied, his gaze fixed on hers in a way that made her heart race. "I have a feeling I'm the one gaining more from all of this." At that moment, under the starry Manchester sky, something new began to blossom. Not just a friendship or a professional partnership, but something deeper, still unnamed, that neither of them was yet ready to fully acknowledge. Weeks turned into months, and what began as a temporary arrangement took on the contours of permanence. The Manchester winter gave way to spring, bringing colours and renewal to the city. David, now 4 months old, was a laughing, healthy baby, fascinated by the vibrant colours and sounds of the world around him. Olivia, increasingly attached to her little brother, took on the role of protector and companion, always attentive to his needs. Raina flourished in her work at the foundation. Her arts background and natural sensitivity in dealing with children brought new energy to the projects. She had implemented an innovative methodology in the workshops, inspired by her previous experiences in London, which combined artistic expression with emotional development. The results were visible. Children who were once shy or problematic found in art a safe channel to express feelings and build self-confidence. Professional success brought Raina an independence she deeply valued. With her salary from the foundation, she could cover David's expenses and even started saving a little for the future. She still lived in Caleb's apartment, a practical decision that benefited everyone, especially Olivia, who dreaded the thought of being separated from Raina and David. Caleb observed this transformation with a mix of pride and fascination. The frightened and distrustful young woman he had found that Christmas had become a confident, capable, and loving woman. During his visits to the foundation, he was surprised to see her conducting meetings with the same firmness with which she cradled David in the early hours, or discussing funding proposals with the same passion with which she told stories to Olivia. Between them, a solid friendship formed, based on mutual respect and admiration. They shared stories of their lives, ambitions for the future, fears and hopes. On nights when the children were already asleep, they would sit on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights as they talked about everything and nothing. It was on one of those nights that Caleb realized something he perhaps had known for some time. His feelings for Raina had changed. It wasn't just gratitude for her help with Olivia or admiration for her work at the foundation. It was something deeper, more frightening, and completely unexpected. The revelation disturbed him. How could he be developing feelings for someone so different from him, in such peculiar circumstances? What would Camilla think of this? And most importantly, what would Raina think if she knew? He decided to keep these thoughts to himself. The arrangement they had worked well for everyone, and he didn't want to complicate things with emotions that might just be a natural reaction to their close cohabitation. Raina, in turn, struggled with similar dilemmas. The gratitude she felt for Caleb sometimes mixed with something more intense that she refused to name. In her most honest moments, she admitted to herself that she had never felt so connected to someone, so understood and respected. But she quickly pushed these thoughts away, convinced that she was confusing gratitude with romantic affection, and that Caleb would never see her that way. The family dynamic, however, followed its natural course. To an outside observer, they seemed like any other family. Dinners together at the table, Sunday outings, celebrations of small achievements like David's first tooth or Olivia's school play. Mrs. Nellie, who initially viewed Raina with suspicion, was now her biggest ally. The housekeeper had succumbed to the baby's charm and the young mother's dedication, taking on the role of surrogate grandmother with a pride she could barely disguise. "This child needs more weight," she would say, preparing elaborate purees for David. "He'll grow up strong as an ox, you'll see." Domestic peace, however, was disturbed one September morning when Caleb received an intriguing call in his office. "Mr. Anderson, this is Marianne Cooper from your company's Human Resources Department. We've received some concerning information about one of your protégés." The woman's tone made it clear that the information was far from positive. "What kind of information, Marianne?" Caleb asked, tense. "Well, a former employee, Denise Price, contacted us alleging she recognized the young woman who is living with you. According to her, this young woman was involved in some kind of legal trouble in the past." "What kind of trouble?" "She didn't specify, sir. She merely suggested it would be prudent to investigate this person's background for your own safety and that of your daughter." Caleb took a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. He was tired of the malicious insinuations, the sideways glances, the generalized distrust that seemed to accompany his decision to help Raina. "Thank you for your concern, Marianne, but I don't believe this is a corporate matter." "I understand, sir. We just thought you should know." After hanging up, Caleb remained in his office, pensive. He didn't want to doubt Raina. He knew her character. He saw her daily dedication to David, to Olivia, to her work at the foundation. But a small seed of doubt had been planted. What if there was something she hadn't told him, something important? Reluctantly, he called Arnold Mason, a trusted lawyer who occasionally provided services to the construction company. "Arnold, I need a discreet favor." "Of course, Caleb. What can I do for you?" "I need to check if there are any antecedents or legal issues under someone's name." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Does this have to do with that young woman who's living with you? The one who was in the papers?" "Yes," Caleb admitted, feeling uncomfortable. "Just as a precaution." "I understand. I'll need the full name, date of birth, that sort of thing." Caleb provided Raina's details, promising to keep the matter in absolute confidence. In the days that followed, he tried to act normally, but there was a subtle tension in his demeanor that didn't go unnoticed by Raina. "Has something happened?" she asked one night after putting the children to bed. "You're acting strange." "Just tiredness," he lied, hating himself for it. "Tough week at the construction company." She nodded, not entirely convinced but respecting his space. 3 days later, Arnold called with the results of his investigation. "I found nothing under Raina Oliveira's name," he informed. No lawsuits, no outstanding issues, clean record. Caleb felt immediate relief. Thank you, Arnold. That's all I needed to know. But, the lawyer hesitated. I found something odd. What? When I cross-referenced the data with temporary shelter records, I discovered she used another name when registering at an institution in Bristol about 8 months ago. Another name. Caleb felt his stomach drop. Yes, she identified herself as Tiana Oliveira, used the same date of birth but a different name. Tiana, the name of Raina's sister, whom she had briefly mentioned in that hospital conversation. I see, Caleb replied, his brain working to process the information. Anything else? No, just that. What do you want me to do with this information? Nothing. Keep it between us, please. After hanging up, Caleb remained motionless in his office, trying to decide what to do. On one hand, the fact that Raina had used a false name was concerning. On the other hand, there was no indication of criminal activity or actual legal problems, just the use of a different identity in a moment of vulnerability. He decided to confront her, not accusatorily but seeking to understand. He owed her that, after all they had shared. That night he waited until the children were asleep. He found Raina on the balcony, her favorite spot in the apartment, watching the illuminated city. We need to talk, he said, sitting beside her. Something in his tone must have betrayed the seriousness of the matter, as her face immediately closed, as if she were bracing for a blow. What's wrong? Caleb took a deep breath. I received some information about you having used another name in the past. Her eyes widened, and for a moment it seemed she would deny it. Then her shoulders slumped, and she nodded slowly. Tiana, she said, almost in a whisper. My sister's name. Why? Caleb asked, without accusation, just trying to understand. Raina was silent for a long moment, her fingers clutching the hem of her blouse tightly. When David was born, she began, her voice trembling, I was alone, completely alone. I couldn't even afford a hospital, so I went to a public maternity ward. I was afraid they would see I had no means, no proper place to live, and take David from me. Caleb felt a pang in his chest, imagining Raina in that situation, young, scared, giving birth with no one by her side. So I used my sister's name, she continued. I was afraid that if I used my real name, they might track me down somehow, discover my situation. Later, when I sought shelter in Bristol, I kept the same name so as not to raise suspicions. The explanation was simple, painful, and entirely understandable. Caleb felt terrible for having doubted her, even briefly. I'm so sorry, he said. I shouldn't have investigated you. It was an invasion of privacy. Why did you do it? She asked, and there was more curiosity than hurt in her voice. Someone from the company, a former employee, made insinuations about you having legal problems in the past. I didn't believe it, but... He hesitated. I have responsibilities. To Olivia, to the company, to the foundation. I needed to be sure. Raina nodded, understanding. I understand. Truly. In your place, I probably would have done the same. She sighed. I've never had problems with the law, Caleb. The only wrong thing I did was use my sister's name out of fear of losing my son, and I would do it again if necessary. The conviction in her voice, the strength of a mother willing to do anything to protect her child, touched Caleb deeply. I believe you, he said, covering her hand with his, and I trust you. Completely. That moment of shared vulnerability, of truths exposed and accepted, brought them even closer. What could have been a rupture became a stronger foundation for the relationship of trust they were building. In the following days, Raina noticed a subtle change in Caleb's behavior. He seemed more open, more present, as if the last vestige of reserve had disappeared between them. The nights on. The balcony grew longer, the conversations deeper, the silences more comfortable. On one of those nights, as they shared a bottle of wine and watched a storm approaching in the distance, Caleb asked an unexpected question. Do you still think about going back to London? Raina considered the question for a moment. Sometimes, she replied honestly, but not like before. Not as an urgent need to escape, you know, more like a distant possibility. "And what keeps you here?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if fearing the answer. Raina smiled, looking at the apartment through the glass doors. Inside, Olivia and David slept, the two children who had stolen her heart in different ways. "The life I've built," she replied simply. "The work at the foundation, which fulfills me more than anything I've ever done. And—" she hesitated, unsure if she should continue. "And?" Caleb encouraged, finally looking at her. "The people," she completed, holding his gaze. "Olivia, David, Mrs. Nellie, you." A silence charged with meaning settled between them. Caleb slowly moved his hand to find hers on the balcony railing. "I'm happy about that," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Very happy." The moment was interrupted by the sound of distant thunder. The storm was approaching, bringing that characteristic Manchester rain, heavy, intense, capable of turning streets into rivers in a matter of minutes. "We'd better go inside," Caleb suggested, still holding her hand. Inside the apartment, with the rain now beating hard against the windows, they checked on the children. Both slept soundly, oblivious to the storm outside. In the hallway between the rooms, Caleb and Raina stopped, still under the effect of that moment on the balcony. "Good night," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Good night," he replied. But he didn't move. For a fleeting instant, it seemed he would lean in, that the space between them would diminish, that something inevitable was about to happen. But then a particularly strong thunderclap shook the building, and the moment dissolved. Raina entered her room, leaning against the closed door, her heart beating at a rhythm that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Across the hall, Caleb did the same, lost in thoughts of lost chances and perfect moments ruined by ill-timed thunder. The next morning, Olivia found something among her mother's old belongings, which she occasionally revisited in secret. It was a handwritten letter, not addressed to anyone in particular, where Camilla reflected on her daughter's future and on the wish that, should anything happen to her, Caleb would find someone who loved Olivia as she did. The girl, though still unable to read perfectly, recognized her mother's handwriting and brought the letter to Caleb during breakfast. "Daddy, look what I found from Mommy." Caleb carefully took the letter, immediately recognizing his wife's handwriting. As he read, his face went through a series of emotions: surprise, sadness, comfort. "What does it say, Daddy?" Olivia asked, curious. "It's a letter from Mommy," he explained, his voice choked. "She wrote about how much she loved you and how she wanted you to always be happy." The simplified explanation seemed to satisfy Olivia, who soon turned her attention back to her cereal. Raina, however, sensed there was more to that letter than Caleb was sharing. Later, when they were alone, he showed her the letter. "I want you to read it," he said, extending the paper, already yellowed with time. Raina hesitated. "Are you sure? It seems very personal." "I am, please." She accepted the paper carefully, as if it were a precious artifact, and began to read. "My love, if you are reading this letter, it is because my suspicions have been confirmed, and I am no longer here. I ask that you not be angry at life for this. We had wonderful years together, more happiness than many people have in an entire existence. What worries me now is you and our Olivia. I know you will be an incredible father to her, as you always have been, but I also know how much you tend to close yourself off when you are suffering. Don't do that. Don't hide from the world, and most importantly, don't hide from love. One day perhaps you will find someone who brings light back into your life, someone who loves Olivia as I love her, someone who makes your heart beat faster, as you always said I did. When that day comes, do not feel guilty. Do not think you are betraying me. You will be honoring what we had, continuing to live fully. I am eternally grateful for our time together, for the love we shared, for the wonderful daughter we raised. Now I ask one last favor. Be happy. Live intensely. Love without reservations. And let our Olivia see this so she learns that life, even with its losses, is a precious gift that deserves to be lived with joy. With all my love, forever, Camilla. When she finished reading, Raina had tears in her eyes. She carefully returned the letter to Caleb. She was truly extraordinary, she said, her voice trembling. Yes, she was, Caleb agreed, folding the letter with reverence. And the way this letter appeared now, it almost seems like a sign, don't you think? Raina didn't answer immediately, lost in thought. The letter had affected her, in an unexpected way. It wasn't just the beauty of the words or the evident love Camilla felt for her family. It was as if somehow the woman was blessing whatever was blossoming between her and Caleb. Sometimes, she finally said, I feel that Camilla is present in the way Olivia smiles, in the energy of the foundation, in the stories you tell about her. Caleb nodded, understanding perfectly. And now, in this letter. As if she knew. Knew what? Raina asked, her heart racing. He looked at her for a long moment as if deciding something important. That one, day someone like you would enter our lives. The confession, though indirect, hung between them like a promise. Something was changing, evolving, transforming into a feeling neither of them had planned, but which seemed increasingly inevitable. The following weekend, Caleb proposed a different outing. He took Raina, David, and Olivia to visit the Isle of Wight, a preserved paradise on the Sussex coast. The day was perfect. Blue sky, gentle breeze, calm sea. The children loved the beach, with Olivia building sandcastles while David observed everything with his curious eyes, protected from the sun under an umbrella. Sitting on the sand, watching Olivia run by the water's edge, Caleb and Raina shared a moment of perfect harmony. Thank you for this, she said, watching the horizon where sky and sea merged. It's the most perfect day I've had in a long time. We have time for many perfect days yet, Caleb replied, his shoulder lightly touching hers. The implication of a shared future did not go unnoticed by Raina. She smiled, allowing herself, for the first time, to believe that perhaps this happiness was not temporary, that perhaps she deserved this second chance that life offered her. The drive back to Manchester was silent, with the children asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted after a day of playing in the sun. Caleb drove, concentrated, while Raina watched the landscape gradually change from the coast to the fields and finally to the metropolitan area. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked, noticing her contemplative silence. About how life comes full circle, she replied, looking briefly at the back seat where David and Olivia slept side by side. A year ago I was desperate, aimless, hopeless. And now, he encouraged, now I'm afraid it's too good to be true, she admitted, verbalizing a fear that constantly accompanied her. That one day I'll wake up and everything will be gone. Caleb reached out, finding her hand on the seat. It won't disappear, he promised. What we've built is real, Raina. As real as those two children sleeping back there. His words brought a comfort she didn't know she needed. Perhaps it was time to stop waiting for the worst, to accept that sometimes life really does offer second chances. Upon arriving home, Caleb carried a sleeping Olivia to her room, while Raina did the same with David. They met again in the hallway as on the night of the storm, but this time there was no thunder to interrupt them. Good night, she said as before. Good night, he replied, but unlike the other night, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. With a gentleness that made Raina's heart leap, Caleb touched her face, his fingers softly tracing the line of her jaw. She closed her eyes, surrendering to his touch, allowing herself, finally, to feel everything she had been suppressing. The kiss, when it came, was soft, hesitant, like a question. She responded by leaning closer, her hand finding its way to the back of his neck, deepening the contact. When they separated, both were breathless, like teenagers on their first kiss. There was surprise in their eyes, but also a certainty that had been growing for months, ever since that Christmas night that changed everything. I didn't plan this, Caleb whispered, his forehead resting against hers. Neither did I, Raina smiled. But I think life had other plans for us. That night, lying in her bed, Raina reflected on everything that had happened. The kiss hadn't just been a physical impulse. It had been a confirmation of something they both already knew, but feared to admit. Something was being born between them, something strong and unexpected, something that could transform the temporary arrangement into something permanent. The idea was both frightening and wonderful. Frightening because it meant opening herself to the possibility of more loss, more pain. Wonderful because, for the first time in her life, she felt she could truly belong somewhere, to someone, to a family. Across the hall, Caleb faced similar dilemmas. The kiss had confirmed what his heart had known for months. He was falling in love with Raina. It wasn't just gratitude or admiration or the comfort of shared routine. It was something deeper, truer. But there were complications. What would others think? How would this affect Olivia? And Camilla's memory? The letter had brought some comfort, as if it were a posthumous blessing, but there was still a part of him that wondered if he was betraying what they had. The next morning, breakfast was a silent affair, with furtive glances and restrained smiles. Mrs. Nellie, sharp as ever, immediately noticed that something had changed. "You two are acting strange today," she commented, pouring more coffee. "Did something happen that I should know about?" "Nothing, Mrs. Nellie," Caleb replied, perhaps too quickly. "Just tired from yesterday's trip." The housekeeper grumbled something unintelligible, casting a knowing look at both of them before returning to the kitchen. Olivia, absorbed in her morning drawing, seemed oblivious to the tension in the air. David, on Raina's lap, looked from one adult to another, as if following a particularly interesting tennis match. "I need to go to the foundation today," Raina commented, breaking the silence. "We have a meeting with potential sponsors for the end-of-year exhibition." "I'll take you," Caleb offered promptly. "I need to stop by there too to sign some documents." The drive to the foundation was made in comfortable silence, as if both knew that something important had changed, but were still processing what it meant. In the foundation's parking lot, before they got out of the car, Caleb gently held Raina's arm. "About last night," he began, hesitant. "We don't need to talk about it now," she interrupted him gently. "We have time." He smiled, relieved and grateful for her understanding. "Yes, we have time," he agreed, gently squeezing her hand before releasing it. As they walked towards the foundation's entrance, side by side, their fingers occasionally touching, both felt they were on the threshold of something new and promising. A second chance neither of them expected to find, but which now seemed as natural as the sun shining over Manchester that spring morning. Raina moved among the guests like a perfect hostess, explaining creative processes, introducing young artists to sponsors, ensuring every detail of the exhibition was impeccable. She wore a simple yet elegant turquoise dress that Caleb had insisted on buying for the occasion, despite her initial protests. "It's your night," he had said. "You deserve to shine." And indeed she shone. The confidence she had gained in recent months radiated from her like a soft light, attracting admiring glances and positive comments wherever she went. Caleb watched her from a distance, proud, with David comfortably nestled in his arms and Olivia clinging to his hand. Wearing a party dress she insisted on showing everyone. "Look how pretty Auntie Ray is, Daddy," the girl commented, following his gaze. "She is, Princess," Caleb agreed, not taking his eyes off Raina as she chatted animatedly with a group of local businessmen, potential sponsors for the Foundation's next projects. Sandra, the administrative coordinator, approached with a satisfied smile. "She's a find, isn't she?" she commented, observing Raina. "The best thing that's happened to the Foundation since Camilla." "To the Foundation and to all of us," Caleb replied sincerely. Sandra studied his face for a moment, sensing something more in his words. "I'm happy to hear that," she finally said. "Camilla would be very pleased to see everyone moving forward, building something new and beautiful." The mention of his late wife did not bring the usual pain. Instead, Caleb felt a strange peace, as if he truly had her blessing for this new phase. "Thank you, Sandra," he said simply, knowing she would understand the weight of those words. As the night progressed, the success of the exhibition became increasingly evident. Several works already displayed the small red tag indicating sold, with the money partially benefiting the young artists, partially supporting the Foundation's projects. Cultural journalists circulated through the space, taking notes and photos. City Council representatives praised the initiative and promised support for future projects. When Raina finally managed a break from her hosting duties, she found Caleb and the children in front of a large, colorful canvas, a collective work by a group of teenagers from Newtown. "What do you think?" she asked, joining them. "It's so colorful," Olivia exclaimed, ecstatic. "I want to make one like this when I grow up." "It's incredible," Caleb agreed, putting his free arm around Raina's waist, disregarding the curious glances around them. "You must be very proud." "I am," she admitted, observing the space filled with art and people. "When I think where I was a year ago and where I am now." "You built this," he stated with conviction, "with your talent, your dedication, your heart." Raina smiled, touched by the compliment, but aware that she was not alone in this journey. "We built it," she gently corrected. "I never would have gotten here without you, without Olivia, without David, without all this family we've created." The word family hung between them, laden with meaning and promise. Caleb squeezed her waist lightly, as if sealing a silent agreement. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Nellie, who came with a worried expression. "Girl, there's a lady asking for you at the reception," she informed. "Said she's your mother." Raina froze, her heart immediately racing. "My mother? Here? Do you want me to tell her you're busy?" Mrs. Nellie offered, protective as always. Raina looked at Caleb, seeking silent guidance. He merely nodded slightly, encouragingly. "No, I'll talk to her," she finally decided. Walking to the reception, Raina felt her legs trembling. She wasn't prepared for this encounter, hadn't rehearsed what to say, how to react. But perhaps she would never truly be prepared. Perhaps some things simply needed to happen in their own unexpected time. Mrs. Claudia stood near the entrance, a middle-aged woman with Raina's same brown eyes, the same face shape she had inherited. She was dressed simply and elegantly, and seemed as nervous as her daughter. "Mother," Raina said, stopping a few steps away. "Raina," Mrs. Claudia replied, her voice choked. "I'm sorry to show up like this without warning. I saw the news of the exhibition in the paper, your name as coordinator. I couldn't resist." The silence between them was laden with years of absence, unspoken words, wounds not yet fully healed. "You came from Brighton just for this?" Raina asked, still maintaining her distance. "It would be worth coming from the other side of the world to see you." "Again," her mother replied with painful simplicity. The sincerity of that answer broke something within Raina. Behind the accumulated hurt, there was the basic, primordial love between mother and daughter, imperfect perhaps, but still real and valuable. "The baby," Mrs. Claudia began hesitantly. "My grandson, David," Raina completed. "He's inside, with my partner and his daughter." The word partner came out naturally, though it was the first time Raina publicly defined her relationship with Caleb that way. "I would very much like to meet him," her mother said, her eyes pleading. "If you allow it, of course." Raina hesitated for a moment, but then thought of everything she had learned in recent months about forgiveness, second chances, and the human capacity to rebuild after deep losses. "Come," she finally said, extending her hand. "I'll introduce you to my family." Mrs. Claudia's smile upon hearing those words lit up her tired face, bringing back traces of the woman Raina remembered from her childhood, before the difficulties, before the painful choices, before the separations. When they returned to the main hall, Caleb immediately recognized who accompanied Raina. He approached with David in his arms, Olivia by his side, an expression of warm receptivity on his face. "Mother, this is Caleb Anderson," Raina introduced, her voice firmer now, "and this is his daughter, Olivia." "Very nice to meet you, Ma'am." Caleb extended his free hand, which Mrs. Claudia shook with evident gratitude. "The pleasure is all mine," she replied, emotional. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I couldn't." The sincere thanks touched Caleb. "Your daughter is an extraordinary woman," he responded. "It has been a privilege to know her and to have her in our lives." Mrs. Claudia nodded, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. before lowering her gaze to the small bundle in Caleb's arms. "And this is—" her voice trailed off. "Your grandson," Raina completed, gently taking David from Caleb's arms and bringing him closer to his grandmother. "David, my son." Mrs. Claudia's hands trembled slightly as she touched the baby's tiny face, who observed her with curiosity. The moment was solemn, laden with meaning, a meeting between generations, a new beginning, a bridge over the chasm that separated them. "He has your eyes," the grandmother whispered, amazed. "Exactly as you said." "And the stubborn chin," Raina added with a slight smile. "Like his mother," Caleb commented, exchanging a knowing look with Raina. Olivia, who watched the scene with childlike curiosity, approached Mrs. Claudia. "Are you David's grandma?" she asked directly. "Yes, dear, I am," Mrs. Claudia replied, bending down to the girl's level. "Then are you my grandma too, because David is my brother now?" The innocent question drew emotional smiles from all the adults. "If you wish, I would be very honored to be your grandma too," Mrs. Claudia replied with respectful seriousness. "Cool," Olivia exclaimed, satisfied. "I didn't have any grandmas nearby before. Mommy's lives very far away." The exhibition continued around them, with guests circulating, admiring works, making contacts. But in that small circle, something much more significant was happening. A family was reconfiguring itself, expanding its boundaries, making room for new members and new possibilities. Later, when the last guests had departed and only the foundation staff remained to organize, Raina found Caleb on the balcony of the historic mansion, contemplating the starry Manchester sky. "It was quite a night," he commented when she joined him. "Don't even get me started," Raina sighed, exhausted but happy. "If someone had told me a year ago that I would be here today, coordinating a successful exhibition, with my mother meeting my son and, well, I would have thought it impossible." "Life has these moments of grace," Caleb reflected. "When we least expect it, when we've given up expecting, something extraordinary happens. Like a stubborn little girl dragging her father to see a stranger in a bandstand on Christmas Eve," she completed with a smile. "Exactly." Caleb turned to face her. "You know, there's something I've been thinking about for some time, something important." The serious tone in his voice made Raina's heart race. "What?" "Remember when we first met and Olivia said she wanted you as a sister?" Raina nodded, vividly recalling that moment that changed everything. "Well, it turns out my daughter, with all her 4-year-old wisdom, was right about the essential. You belong in our family, but wrong about how." He paused, taking something from his jacket pocket. It was a small velvet box which made Raina hold her breath. "Caleb." "Let me finish, please," he gently asked. "I don't want you to be my sister, or just the mother of Olivia's brother or a permanent guest. I want you to be my partner, my companion, my wife, if you accept." He opened the small box, revealing a simple but elegant ring with a blue stone that resembled the shade of the dress she was wearing. "It's not charity," he hastened to clarify. "It's not pity or convenience or any of those things you feared at first. It's love, Raina, pure and simple. It happened when we least expected it, perhaps when we least sought it, but it happened." Raina looked alternately at the ring and at Caleb's face, a myriad of emotions passing through her eyes. "Is this serious?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I've never been more serious in my life," he assured. "I'm not asking you to forget your past or to change who you are. I'm asking you to build a future together with everything we are, including our stories, our scars, our children." Silent tears began to stream down Raina's face, but her smile lit up the night. "Yes," she replied simply. "Yes, I want to build that future with you." Caleb slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a tight embrace, followed by a kiss that sealed the promise made. The next morning, sitting at the breakfast table with Mrs. Nellie, Mrs. Claudia, who had been invited to stay the night, Olivia and David, Caleb and Raina announced their engagement. The reaction was exactly what they expected. Olivia jumped for joy, declaring that, "Now Auntie Ray is going to be my real mommy." Mrs. Nellie sniffled, disguising her emotion with a grumble about that man finally coming to his senses, and Mrs. Claudia hugged her daughter with tears in her eyes, whispering how happy she was to see her find her way. As the makeshift family celebrated around the table, Raina observed the scene with a sense of fulfillment she had never imagined possible. Somehow the universe had transformed her most desperate moment, that cold night in the park, aimless, hopeless, into the beginning of an extraordinary journey. She looked at David, smiling in his high chair, at Olivia chattering about what Mommy Ray's dress would be like, at Caleb, who watched her with quiet love in his eyes. It was a family built not by blood or conventions, but by love, by chance, by the courage to take a chance when all seemed lost. The tension had grown again when Raina, pressured by her own conscience, began to plan her departure. For her, that cohabitation had exceeded the limits of what was temporary. She didn't want to be a burden or a source of controversy for Caleb and his daughter. She started selling homemade sweets with Mrs. Nellie to save some money. One afternoon, Caleb realized that Raina was collecting her belongings, determined to leave by the end of the week. He didn't try to stop her immediately, but the idea of returning to the silence of before seemed unbearable. But then came the proposal that changed everything. Not of charity or fleeting help, but a real dignified professional proposal that restored Raina's autonomy and also legitimately integrated her into what was already her life, even if she hadn't yet realized it. And now, with the ring on her finger and her heart full of hope, she knew she was no longer a temporary visitor in that house, in that family. She was an integral, essential part, loved for who she was, with all her past and future potential. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked softly, noticing her distant gaze. "About how life comes full circle," she replied, smiling. "About how sometimes we need to get completely lost to find our way back home. And this is your home now," he stated, not as a question, but as a certainty. "It is," Raina agreed, looking around at the people who had become her family. "This is where I belong." And at that moment, with the morning sun streaming through the kitchen windows, illuminating the domestic scene, Raina finally allowed herself to believe that she deserved this happiness, this second chance, this family built by love and by chance, this future that opened before her, luminous and full of possibilities. The months following the engagement brought a new dynamic to the Anderson family. Spring gave way to the Manchester summer, which, though less intense than in other parts of the country, brought sunny days perfect for outdoor excursions. The wedding date was set for March of the following year, when David would be over a year old and could participate more actively in the ceremony, as Olivia insisted he should. Preparations progressed at a calm pace, reflecting the couple's preference for an intimate and meaningful celebration over a grand event. The guest list was modest: close friends, colleagues, from the construction company and the foundation, some families of the children served by the social projects, and of course Mrs. Claudia and Tiana, who would finally meet her nephew and the new family her sister had found. Raina had decided to reconnect with her younger sister after reconciling with her mother. The first phone conversations were hesitant, laden with unspoken explanations and implicit apologies. But soon the childhood connection re-established itself, and the sisters resumed sharing confidences and plans, as if the time of separation had been merely a parenthesis in their story. "She's so excited to be a bridesmaid," Raina commented to Caleb one night as they reviewed the ceremony details. "She said she's already looking for a dress, even though it's months away." Caleb smiled, happy to see the sparkle in his fiancée's eyes as she spoke of her refound family. "Olivia talks about nothing else either. Yesterday she asked me if she can throw petals of all colors, not just the traditional white roses." "And what did you say?" "That she can throw an entire rainbow if she wants. It's our day, our rules, isn't it?" Raina laughed, leaning in to kiss him lightly. "Exactly. Our rules, our story." The new life as an officially recognized family also brought its challenges. The media exposure, which had diminished after the first months of scandal, returned with force when the engagement was announced in a discreet note in the social column. This time, however, the tone was different, less sensationalist, more respectful, though still with that persistent curiosity about the unlikely love story between the businessman and the young woman he sheltered on Christmas Eve. Caleb and Raina decided to give a single interview to a respected newspaper, explaining their story on their own terms. It was a frank conversation, without glamorization or excessive dramatization. Just the truth of two people who found love when they least expected it. "We are not a fairy tale," Raina stated during the interview. "We are real people who went through real difficulties and found each other at the right time. If there is anything extraordinary about it, it is merely proof that life can surprise us when we are at rock bottom." The interview was well received, even leading to an increase in donations to the Camilla Anderson Foundation and inspiring other companies to develop support programs for single mothers in vulnerable situations. Raina suddenly found herself as a kind of unofficial spokesperson for a cause she knew intimately. "You're becoming a public figure," Caleb observed one night, after another invitation for her to participate in a panel on policies to support vulnerable motherhood. "How do you feel about that?" Raina pondered the question as she watched David, already asleep in his crib. The baby, now almost 7 months old, grew strong and healthy, oblivious to the extraordinary journey that had brought him there. "Strange," she finally admitted. "I never sought the spotlight. But if my story can help other women, in the situation I was in, it's worth the discomfort." Her work at the foundation remained her primary passion. After the success of the New Perspectives exhibition, Raina developed an even more ambitious project, an incubator for artistic talents that offered not only technical training, but also guidance to turn art into a sustainable career. The initiative, named Future Studio, had attracted important sponsors and even a partnership with the University of Manchester, which would offer partial scholarships to the most promising young people. One December afternoon, almost exactly a year since that encounter in Regent's Park, Raina was absorbed in spreadsheets and reports in the Foundation's office when she received an unexpected visit. A young woman of approximately her age, with a baby in her arms, waited shyly at the reception. "Sorry to bother you," the visitor began, nervous. "I read about you in the newspaper, about your story and the work you do here. I'm going through something similar, and I didn't know where else to go." Raina looked at the young mother and saw herself reflected in those frightened eyes. Without hesitation, she invited her in, offered her water and a safe place to breastfeed the baby, and simply listened to her story. A painfully familiar narrative of abandonment, closed doors, and increasingly scarce options. That same night, during dinner, Raina shared the encounter with Caleb. "We need to do something more structured," she concluded, after recounting the young mother's situation. "We can't simply rely on the luck that every vulnerable mother finds an Olivia and a Caleb in her path." Caleb listened attentively, recognizing the sparkle in his fiancée's eyes, the same one she had when talking about the Foundation's artistic projects. "What do you have in mind?" he asked, already knowing that she had probably developed more than just a vague idea. "A specific program for single mothers," Raina explained, her voice gaining intensity with enthusiasm. "Within the Foundation's structure, but focused on professional training, psychological support, childcare for the babies while they study or work. Something that offers not just emergency aid, but real tools for autonomy." As she detailed the proposal, Caleb watched with admiration how Raina had transformed her own painful experience into something constructive, something that could change the lives of other women. It was this ability to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles that had made him fall in love with her. "I think it's an excellent idea," he agreed when she finally paused. "The Foundation has budget space next year for a pilot project, and I'm sure we can find specific sponsors for it." "Really?" Raina's eyes shone with hope. "Of course. In fact, I believe the construction company could be the first official sponsor. We could establish an internship program for some of these mothers in the administrative sector." That night, while the children slept and the rest of the house fell silent, Caleb and Raina stayed up late, outlining the contours of what would become the New Beginnings Project, an initiative that, unbeknownst to them yet, would become a model for similar programs across the country in the years to come. That year's Christmas brought a special celebration. Exactly 1 year after the encounter that changed their lives, the Anderson family, now expanded to include Mrs. Claudia and Tiana, who had come from Brighton for the holidays, gathered for a dinner that combined traditions from both families. The house was decorated with lights. The aroma of French toast and roast turkey filled the air, and the children, Olivia excited about presents, David fascinated by the colored lights, set the tone of genuine joy that only childhood can produce. "A toast," Caleb proposed, raising his glass when everyone was gathered at the table, "to the coldest and most blessed night of my life." "To Olivia and her stubbornness," Raina added, smiling at her stepdaughter whom she now considered her own. "To new beginnings," Mrs. Claudia completed, her voice choked with emotion. The toast sealed not only the Christmas celebration, but the extraordinary journey they had traveled together, a journey of losses and gains, of fears overcome and hopes renewed, of a family built not by blood, but by love and the courage to take a chance when all seemed lost. After dinner, when the presents had been opened and the children finally fell asleep, Caleb found Raina on the balcony, her favorite place to contemplate the city. She was observing the same view that a year earlier she had admired as a temporary guest, uncertain about her place in that world, so different from hers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping her in a warm embrace from behind. "How unpredictable life is," she replied, leaning back against him. "A year ago I was desperate, homeless, hopeless, fighting just to keep David alive and with me. And now I have a family, a job I love, projects that can help other women like I was. I have you." She turned to face him. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve so much happiness." "That's the thing about happiness," Caleb replied, touching her face with tenderness. "It's not a question of deserving. It's a question of embracing it when it arrives, of building upon it, of sharing it." Raina smiled, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "And of giving back," she added, "of transforming our happiness into something bigger than ourselves." "Exactly, like you're doing with the New Beginnings project." They stood there, embracing under the Manchester stars, silently planning the future they would build together, a future that would include a spring wedding, the expansion of the Foundation's projects, perhaps more children to complete their unconventional family, and certainly many challenges and joys along the way. Christmas Eve, which a year earlier had marked the unlikely beginning of their story, now symbolized not only a personal new beginning, but the start of something greater, a legacy of hope and opportunities for other families who, like theirs, needed only a chance to flourish. In the children's room, Olivia and David slept peacefully, their dreams cradled by the security of a home full of love. And in that nocturnal peace, with the illuminated city at their feet and Caleb's warmth beside her, Raina finally understood the true meaning of those words she had so often heard, but which only now made complete sense. Home is not a place. It is where the heart finds peace. In January, with Olivia's school holidays in full swing, the family decided to take a special trip. They chose the Isle of Wight on the Sussex coast, where they had experienced significant moments months earlier. This time, however, it wouldn't just be a day trip, but a full week of rest and family bonding. They rented a simple but comfortable house near the beach, without excessive luxuries but with everything needed to accommodate the extended family. Mrs. Claudia and Tiana had been invited and enthusiastically accepted the opportunity to spend more time with David and get to know their future brother-in-law and his daughter better. The days on the East Island established their own rhythm, far from crowded schedules and urban commitments. Mornings were dedicated to the beach, with Olivia building increasingly elaborate sandcastles, David experimenting with the texture of the sand between his chubby fingers, and the adults alternating between swimming in the sea and moments of watching over the children. In the afternoons, when the sun became too strong, they retreated to the shade of the house's veranda. There, amidst conversations, card games, and occasional naps, they strengthened the bonds that united them. Raina observed, with a sense of fulfillment, how quickly Olivia had grown attached to Grandma, Claudia, and how Tiana proved to be a dedicated aunt, always willing to entertain the little ones with impromptu stories. "You've built a beautiful family," Tiana commented one afternoon as they watched Caleb playing in the sand with the children from a distance. "Different, unconventional, but beautiful." "I didn't build it alone," Raina replied, her eyes following David's movements as he crawled determinedly after a seashell. "It was chance or destiny or whatever that brought us together. I just had the courage to stay and see where it would lead." "You always had courage," Tiana observed. "Even when you left, home pregnant and alone, especially at that moment." Her younger sister's words brought a perspective that Raina rarely considered. In her internal narrative, she always saw herself as someone who had been saved, rescued by Caleb and Olivia's kindness. But perhaps there was another way to see the story. Perhaps her own courage to move forward, to not give up on David even in the most adverse circumstances, was also a fundamental part of this journey. On the penultimate night of the trip, while the children slept and Mrs. Claudia and Tiana had gone for a nocturnal walk on the beach, Caleb surprised Raina with a candlelit dinner on the veranda. The table had been meticulously set, with wildflowers gathered from the region and the best tableware the rented house had. "What are we celebrating?" she asked, touched by the romantic gesture. "Nothing specific. Everything, really," Caleb replied, pouring her a glass of wine. "These moments of peace, our family, the future we are building together." Under the stars of the Isle of Wight, with the sound of the sea in the background, they shared not only a meal but also dreams, plans and memories. They talked about the New Beginnings project, which had already found its first headquarters in an old house near the foundation, about the possibility of expanding the family after the wedding, about the school they would choose for David when the time came. "Have you ever thought about having more children?" Caleb asked almost casually as they enjoyed dessert. Raina looked at him, surprised by the direct question. "Honestly, when David was born, in the circumstances we were in, the idea of another child seemed absolutely impossible. But now—" "Now?" he encouraged when she hesitated. "Now I find myself thinking about what it would be like to have a baby under different circumstances, a planned, desired, celebrated pregnancy, a baby that would be half you, half me." She smiled shyly. "Olivia would be a wonderful older sister. She already is with David." "She would be indeed," Caleb agreed, his eyes shining with the possibility. "Perhaps after the wedding, when the New Beginnings project is well underway." "Perhaps," she agreed, reaching her hand across the table to find his, "one step at a time." Upon returning to Manchester, they brought not only tanned skin and bags of shells collected by Olivia, but also a new serenity, a reinforced conviction that the chosen path was the right one. The routine resumed, Caleb with the construction projects, Raina dividing her time between the foundation and the nascent New Beginnings project, Olivia returning to school, David continuing to explore the world with the insatiable curiosity of babies. February arrived with the final preparations for the wedding, scheduled for the first Saturday in March. Raina's dress, a simple but elegant design, was ready, as was the princess dress Olivia had insisted on wearing as a flower girl. The chosen venue was the Camilla Anderson Foundation's own garden, a decision that seemed natural for both, considering the role the institution had played in their story. "Do you think she would approve?" Raina asked Sandra one day, as they finalized the decoration details. "Camilla, I mean. The wedding here in her space." Sandra, who had known Camilla better than anyone, smiled with genuine conviction. "I am absolutely sure she would. Camilla always saw the foundation as a place of transformation, of new possibilities. What better symbolism for a wedding?" The answer brought comfort to Raina, who, despite the security in her relationship with Caleb, occasionally still wondered how to reconcile respect for Camilla's memory with the building of her own story alongside him. On the eve of the big day, following a tradition that Mrs. Claudia insisted on maintaining, the bride and groom slept separately. Caleb stayed in the apartment with Olivia, while Raina, David, Mrs. Claudia and Tiana stayed in a nearby hotel. The separation, though brief, served for both to reflect on the journey that had brought them there and the meaning of the commitment they would make the next day. Lying in the hotel bed with David sleeping peacefully beside her, Raina thought about everything she had lived through in the past year. Images passed through her mind like a film, The cold night in the park, the luxurious apartment that had intimidated her at first, David's illness, the doubts, the fears, the decision to stay, the work at the foundation, the first kiss, the reconnection with her mother, the engagement, the plans for the future. Every moment, every choice, every obstacle overcome had contributed to shaping her into the woman she was now. Stronger, more confident, more aware of her own worth and capability. She was no longer the frightened young woman hiding under a false name, fearing to lose her child. She was Reina Oliveira, about to become Reina Anderson, a respected project coordinator, a dedicated mother, a loved woman. With this comforting thought, she fell asleep, ready for the new chapter that would open with the next morning.